Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com and also WFOV, that's radio station 92.1, and we're very glad to have them with us as well. I'm glad to be back from a short trip to South Carolina and to Birmingham, Alabama, and we're back now full force. We're taping the program this time a little bit later than normally. We normally tape from 2 to 3 on Mondays, and we're taping today at 1 o'clock on Wednesday, and we'll be up and ready to go with the airing of the program on WFOV at the usual time on Saturday at 12 o'clock.
And also, you can catch your stuff, too, on in rotation with stuff from All Points TV on Channel 17, Public Access Channel, if you're in the Southeast Michigan Comcast subscriber, it's on Tuesdays from 8:30 to 9:30. So.
Okay, I was wondering, John, why everybody was mad. I couldn't figure out why everybody was mad at me in Flint. So it's airing on channel. It's airing now on Channel 17.
In rotation with other things because we have so many shows. I rotate stuff. Yeah.
When did we start that, John?
We had it for a while. Then I stopped it for a while because I didn't know if people still wanted it, and so I asked people, and they said they didn't mind if their content was up there. So Channel 17, 8:30, 9:30 on Tuesdays. It should be there, and we upload stuff through the internet too. It makes it a lot faster than having to burn DVDs and then send them down there.
I see.
Now we just upload it to a server, a file server. So.
Well, I can tell you that if they're mad at me now, they're gonna be much madder after this program is over, because I came to the studio today after being away for a week and going through a lot of things I went through down south. I said when I come back, I got to kind of talk about a few of those things that occurred, but that's not why they're going to be upset with me. They're going to be upset because I'm running a narrative here that counters what we are seeing on CNN and MSNBC and these other liberal networks. And I want to also counteract some of the things that are being said here by these silly, disgusting, despicable politicians on the national level, some of the most disgusting people on the planet. With no understanding of anything, particularly no understanding of the Constitution. We keep talking about, and I'm talking here also about the immigration thing. We keep talking about how great the country is, and this country is great. But I want us to understand why it's great. And I'm going to read something here from Ayn Rand in a book called For the New Intellectual, so you won't think it's great because of these silly politicians who are running this country into the ground with their nonsense. I'll read 2 passages from Ayn Rand's book, For the New Intellectuals. And I want to read, first of all, page 20, a little excerpt from that page, where she says, the first society in history whose leaders were neither Attilas nor witch doctors. When she talks about Attila, she's talking about politicians or the man of force. And that's all politicians. All politicians. There are 2 things about politicians. This is me speaking now. One is that they are parasites, and the other is that they are men and women of force. And behind what they say, whether you see it or not, is a gun. It is force. And if you think otherwise, then violate some tenet and then see what happens. Just because you don't see the gun does not mean that the gun is not in back of what they do and what they say. But Ayn Rand is saying here, excuse me, the first society in history whose leaders were neither Attilas nor witch doctors. And she calls the witch doctors the man, and you would have to include women now, the man and the woman of superstition. A society led, dominated, and created by the producers was the United States of America. The moral code implicit in its political principles was not the witch doctor's code of self-sacrifice. The political principle embodied in its constitution were not Attila's blank check on brutal force, but men's protection against any future Attilas and their ambition. So Ayn Rand is making a very profound statement here, and I want to come behind it to go into why the Constitution was drawn up and why it was written. But let me read another one of her brilliant insights on page, if I'm not mistaken, is on page 56. She says on page 56, and I want person to understand this in the context of what's going on right now in our culture and what's going on in the political arena. She says, no discussion, cooperation, agreement, or understanding is possible among men who substitute emotion for proof. And if you listen to these people who are in opposition to President Trump, those on the left, you'll see that nothing but emotion. In fact, that's all you have pretty much on these alphabet soup stations. CNN is a rabid fake news network. MSNBC, and really, to some extent, Fox, but not as bad as it is on the other networks. None of them are sane. And when you listen to CNN, I mean, if you could listen to 15 minutes of CNN and maintain your sanity, you're a much stronger person than many, because that station never seemingly says anything other than anything that the president does is wrong. And I'll tell you something, I can't even imagine what state this country would be in if we had turned this country over to the insane folks who are out here with these polemics against this president. And it doesn't matter what he does, everything he does is wrong. And what he doesn't do, they make up and say that he did it. For example, they were saying last week with the shooting that occurred in Pittsburgh, rather than mourning the death of fellow Americans, and we all come together and understand the danger of anti-Semitism in the culture, in addition to other forms of racism. Anti-Semitism is also a form of racism, and rather than coming together and to heal the wounds that would cause a person to go into a synagogue and shoot people down in a place of worship, rather than having a moratorium on the politics, here you have these crazy, you can't call them reporters, you can't call them news person, you can't call them journalists. This is not journalism, this is propaganda. These are people that are emotionally wound up. I guess the best writing on it, on the mindset that we are talking about here, is a book written by Lyle Roster, who is an MD, who wrote the book called The Liberal Mind. And I would take the writings of Rossiter, the subtitle of his book being The Psychological Causes of Political Madness, and I will take the writings of this book and apply it to what I'm seeing out here with these people on the left.
You ever, I don't know if you, I'm going to throw this in here, but I don't know if you're a movie buff, but if you watch Star Wars, they always talk about using the Force and trust your feelings. Well, the thing is, it goes back, if you kind of see the parallel what Ayn Rand's talking about. Okay, maybe you use your emotions on your own personal decision making, but it shouldn't be done for policy that affects general. And that's what happens is the liberals in this country have a tendency. My grandmother would say to my sister when she cried all the time, "Your bladder's too close to your eyes." Okay, and that's exactly what it is with these people. And the thing is, they don't understand other people also have an emotional connection to something else that they're not wanting to destroy to accommodate these people, these group of people they're accommodating. So I mean, they don't want to look at that. It's just bad policy making because they're feeling rather than thinking.
Yeah, and John, and feeling, and also projecting those feelings out toward others. Everything that they left, and when I say everything, I don't mean everything in terms of, I'm using that word metaphorically. I'm saying that for the most part, what the left does is that it engages its feelings, outward. It doesn't feel it. They don't feel it inward. They project their feelings outward. So it's not them that's doing the disorderly deeds. It's the projection of those deeds off on the ones who they are accusing of the behavior. For example, they're saying that Donald Trump is stirring up animus in the society, and so what Maxine Waters, who is a loon, John, Maxine Waters needs to be. She needs to be institutionalized.
Well, I think she should be heavily sedated and monitored because, I mean, she's unhinged. She's unhinged. She ages easily.
This woman is up here talking about, if you see people in public, people that she disagrees with, politically they don't have the same views that Maxine Waters has. And of course, Maxine Waters' views come from the mountaintop. She went up on the mountain, got the tablets, and came down. And she knows all of the ins and outs of all the issues that are facing the country, and anyone that disagrees with this mountaintop view, they have to be censored. And she says, if you see them in public, if you see them out there having lunch, if they are in a public place, you create a crowd, and you tell them that they're not wanted. You're not wanted where? In the country? I mean, John, these people are unhinged. And then you had Hillary Clinton, who I am so glad, as we come on the other side of the election, I am so glad that the American people had the foresight to reject the vision, hidden for the most part, but visible enough to know this woman was dangerous. The woman that had persons incarcerated because of her lying about Benghazi, saying that they were just simply people that were ignited and made angry because of a tape that had been made over here in, I think, Texas. And the tape had inflamed the Muslims. And that's why they went over there and stormed the embassy. And the person made the tape that nobody even had seen. I don't think most persons in this country have seen it or were aware of. That was the person they were accusing of inciting the violence that occurred in Benghazi. Put him in jail. The man was put in jail by these gangsters, led by Hillary Clinton, who was Secretary of State at that point, and endorsed by this man who is also unhinged, Barack Obama, who will go down in history, not like Michelle is painting him, will go down in history for what he is, a usurper, an interloper. This man, you see him unhinged right now on television. That man is out here talking about Donald Trump is wrong by telling people that you're not going to start a caravan and march the caravan into this country unchecked. We're just going to let you come in here and invade the sovereignty of this country, violate our rules of engagement, not go through the process, and that you should not be stopped.
If I go to board a plane, I have to take my belt off, I have to take my shoes off, I can't have nail clippers, I can't have keys with sharp objects on it. They even take jewelry that's got sharp edges from people. Yet they're letting these people come with bags full of stuff without unchecked. That's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous, John. These leaders are the ones unhinged. That's what Ayn Rand is saying on page 20 of the book. America is great now, but let's understand why America is great. Ayn Rand, I'll read it again because I think it needs reinforcement. Well, it needs to be repeated. America, she says, is the first society in history whose leaders were neither Attilas nor witch doctors. A society led, dominated, and created by the producers. And that's the United States of America. Now, that's at the beginning point she's talking about in terms of the founding of the country. I'm not saying that's the way it is right now, because the Constitution wasn't able to ban these people down, chain these people down forever. Because what Attila does, and that's who they are, all politicians are Attila. But the Constitution chained them down, and that was the intention of the Constitution. This document right here, and for those on the radio, I'm holding up the Constitution of the United States. This entire book, the entire document that's contained in this, I'm having in book form here, but this entire document is written against Attila
Well, see, our lawmakers in D.C. probably recognize the printing because they got that printer on their toilet paper and they wipe their butts with it every day when they use the bathroom. That's what they do. That's what they do with our Constitution.
They sort of dismiss it, and they don't have any respect for it. And that's why Judge Napolitano wrote the book called The Constitution in Exile. And Woods has a book out. I think Woods is the author of this book. It's called Who Killed the Constitution? Well, I'll tell you who killed the Constitution. Attila killed it. Attila being the man of force. That's who killed it.
Well, I remember Facebook banned a couple of users of theirs too because they actually quoted quotes from the Declaration of Independence a couple months ago. They actually banned people for citing the Declaration of Independence. I mean, that's how bad this has gotten.
That's how bad it's gotten, John. If you go up there and say that you have the freedom of religion in this country today, you tell these sick psychopaths. That's who our leaders are. These people have a psychological disorder. Has anyone ever considered that the people that are leading this country are unhinged? The liberal man, the psychological cause of political madness. Has anybody considered that the political leaders of this country are mad?
Well, see, politics. See, what happened is years ago you might have people who were willing to allow for this stuff, but they were kept in check by the Constitution and a population that was enamored with the Constitution. Okay, whereas now they want to stretch the envelope. They hear groups agitating because they have issues with what they think is oppressive in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. So now they're willing to go even further. These politicians, they actually basically it's who's controlling whom. Are they taking their lead from a public, or are they leading the public? You know,
John, they're not taking their lead from the public. That much is clear. We don't have any control over our leadership, just like they don't have any control over Kim Jong-un in North Korea. The only thing you can do, and hopefully we'll begin to catch on to the only thing we have that we can use as an arsenal against them, is to turn these people out with regularity. But we're not even doing that. I read a report as I was reading last night. This book about it's called Official Lies: How Washington Misleads Us, written by James Bennett and Thomas DeLorenzo. One of my favorite writers is DeLorenzo. So anything he writes, I'm going to definitely be picking that up and reading it. What he says, along with James Bennett, in a book called Official Lies, Lies, Official Lies, because that's all they do in Washington, that's all politicians do, is that the residual rate of politicians, them getting reelected and reelected and reelected, is 96%. And when persons start talking about how they don't have any confidence in government, they don't have any confidence in government, but they keep returning their own elected leaders over and over again back to Congress, but they don't have any confidence in Congress. But they don't equate that with their own congressperson. They keep voting them back in. And we have some opportunities here in this state. I shouldn't be mentioning names here because we're not pushing one opponent, one candidate or another, but we have a chance to make a statement in this state next Tuesday, and that needs to be made all over the country. But we have to also have a strategy in order to get this done as well. I'm with Ann Coulter on this point. Ann Coulter said that the Republican Party does not deserve to win, but America does not deserve the Democratic Party to be in power. So we got to use a strategy here. Although both parties are terrible, and neither one, the Republican Party nor the Democratic Party, is representative of the American people. And they ought to get those labels off these parties, because both of these labels show these parties are fraudulent. They have a nerve. You have a nerve to have a party called the Republican Party. And it's even more audacious to say that you have a party called the Democratic Party. And they have the nerve to talk about there are some rhinos in the Republican Party, meaning Republicans in name only, as if there's not all of them. You don't think Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, and Paul Ryan, I am glad you're leaving. You know, we used to have that little thing when I was a child that said, glad you're gone because you stayed too long. Well, he hasn't gone yet. He won't be leaving until January the 3rd, when we sway in the next criminals, some of them returning, 96% of them returning. Well, not so much this time, because 40 some odd members of the Republican Party stepped down. And by the way, why do you think they did that? Why do you think that 40 some odd Republicans stood down and opened up those seats so that those seats not to be vied for in terms of those seats falling in the hands either of the Republican Party or the Democratic Party? And why did they do that? They did it, I'll tell you why they did it. They did it to further expose a president that they could not, being a member of the president's party, come out in opposition to him, or that would be too much exposure. So Paul Ryan and the rest of those quote-unquote rhinos are stepping to the side so that if the new Congress comes in, as most of the Democrats, let's say in the House of Representatives, they can go forward with what they could not go forward with if the Republican Party maintained its majority in the House. And they're talking about impeachment of this president. Couldn't do it as long as there was a majority of Republicans, because they could not hide their face and to go along with that. So they just stepped to the side. And that gives a clear path, at least in their mind, if the Democrats take this House, to the pathway to what they have in mind. But they're not telling the American people about that, because Attila does not talk straight.
I do have a insert here if you want.
Okay.
It's from MASH TV series
Okay.
about a press conference and how this colonel is avoiding the issue of they're trying to direct him. And I think this is what it says when they're at direct questions. I'll play the clip. Okay, listen to it.
Okay.
This is a press conference. The last thing I want to do is answer a lot of questions.
Did you hear that?
Yeah, a press conference. And if they answer the question, John, they're going to be talking out of both sides of their mouth. It's not going to be a straight answer. Speaking about MASH, let me bring in another side point. You know what, Native Americans. You know what Native Americans call these politicians? And they told them. They said that they speak with a forked tongue. They weren't lying, because Helen Hunt. You ever heard of this woman named Helen Hunt Jackson, who wrote the book called 100 Years, 100 Years of Dishonor, or something like that. She was talking about how all the treaties they were writing, these politicians now, all these politicians that had written agreements with the Native Americans, every last one of them she wrote 100 years of dishonor, because every treaty that they made, every promise they made, was in fact broken. Now, this is not at the founding parts of the country. This is in the aftermath of the so-called Civil War. If you go look at when all these violations would have occurred, that's after the military had flexed its muscles in terms of defeating the South. Is that right, John? You're aware of that, right?
Yeah, I know.
You know, when D. Brown wrote this book called Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, he was writing about Wounded Knee in 1890. That's when that occurred. Or you go look at Custer. That's 1876. That's 1 year after the Reconstruction had come to a close. So what does that mean? The Army is being pulled out of the South in the aftermath of Reconstruction, and that Army is being remobilized and put out there to deal with Native Americans. They had dealt with the South. They're now dealing with the Native Americans in a more holistic fashion.
See that, by the way.
So we have to understand who we are dealing with, and we're dealing with Attila.
You know, that's right. Another thing is too, if you anybody who thinks our government can be trusted at any point, realize that our government, the government of the United States, I can't say our government because one thing, it's a different rotation, different lineup, if you want to call it, but it's the same type of people. Okay, it's the same type of people being attracted to power, and what it is they've always. But people say, well, they put trust or they think that they're safe. Nobody's safe, because if the Native Americans could be lied to, and then if you look at the benefits army, people who are guaranteed their benefits at the end of First World War, the Depression hit and they made a march on Washington and they were encamped there to get demand their payments early because they needed the money. The government sent in troops and killed the people in their encampments. So that kind of stuff. It's Native Americans. These were largely white people. And look at the time that the police down there in Philadelphia blew up an entire block to get at a group of people that were there because back
it was in Philadelphia.
Yeah, Philadelphia.
And the group was called Move.
Right. So if they can do that, people say, well, I don't care. I don't care about those organizations. I don't care about those people. Look at Waco. And, in Waco.
Look what they did there, John.
Look at Ruby Ridge. They say, well, those are racist. Okay. Everybody is at risk when the government does not put in check. And I've already given examples of Native Americans, the Tuskegee Institute, or the Tuskegee experiment.
Right.
That's another thing.
That's a program. Go ahead.
So, anybody who thinks these people can be trusted, or that's going to benefit the whites, or the whites are, they've screwed everybody over. Okay, John, everybody who comprises this country, they've been screwed.
It is amazing to me that anybody believe anything these parasites, these politicians, that they believe anything these people say. All they do. When Bennett and De Lorenzo wrote this book, Official Lies, How Washington Misleads Us, they didn't say they mislead us on X and not Y, or Y and not Z. The government misleads the American people on everything. All they do is lie. And for people to believe anything that these parasites say is amazing to me, that anything comes out of their mouth. Let me give you an example of something that seems to be out of the mix. Let's take the global warming, which is a government-run, funded lie. I go on these radio shows. I was on there with she'll be listening to this program because she likes to monitor what I do, so she can criticize what I do. I don't, something, let me tell you something. This is Maul speaking. I don't care who doesn't like what I say and what my stands are. I don't seek anybody's approval. I approve. You know how they say at the end of those commercials for politicians, they have a person come on there and they give you the rundown. Every one of the things they're saying is lying. And then at the end of it, they say, and I'm so-and-so, and I approve this message. Well, I'm not running for any office. And therefore, I don't have to mask anything like the politicians do. And they are all masked. There's not one politician that's out there right now that it means all 435 members of the House, all 100 members of the Senate, all the politicians in all the state houses of the legislative branch of government, all the governors, every last one of them, without any exception, is masked. And what they're masking first and foremost is what Ayn Rand is saying about them, and that is that they are Attila, and they are masking that fact first and foremost. But this seems to be something that's outside of their orbit. Global warming. You would think that the scientists would be the ones in charge of that. In terms of the scientists have done the experiment, and they have concluded, based upon the experiments that they've run and looking at it over time, that the globe is now warming, and that the globe is warming because of man-made, man is causing it. And they're causing it, by the way, by something that nature itself intended. Nature intends for the trees, the plants, and human beings to, in fact, compensate each other. So what is causing the globe to warm, according to the political scientists, these are the political scientists today. It used to be a time when political science was a field in the humanities. You would take political science along with history, psychology, those classes in the social studies realm. Now political science is the politicians having captured by paying off through entitlement programs and through grants, paying off the scientists. And so now the science is political science. No longer is it a course of study in the humanities. It's now the politicians have paid off the scientists, who have now been caught in the orbit of the politicians, who come in to say what the politicians want them to say.
Welcome back, you WFO viewers too. I couldn't get that thing to play then, so I was watching it. So we're back on it. So welcome back, WFO viewers. Listeners.
Yeah, we didn't take our 26-minute break. Sorry about that.
I couldn't play that for some reason. The track didn't play, so we'll just roll into it. Yeah.
Okay, that was John's fault. That was John.
Yeah, it was my fault. Yeah, it was. I was like, oh man, it didn't play. So.
John's the technician here, one of the technicians here. And they do an excellent job. I don't want to ever act like I'm criticizing anything that goes on here because, as I say so often here, we could not do the program without our technicians. We're the ones in front of the camera, but we're not the ones that make the show go. These shows go because of the excellent job being done by those in the studio who don't take any bows, by the way. They just come in and do their job, and they're happy to be behind the scenes. I'll have to call them out sometime and let them come and take a bow. No, these politicians are poison in this country. And this document, I'm holding up again the Constitution of the United States. You know, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. That's why the Constitution was ordained for the United States of America. But this book, mine is in book form, but this document is written against Attila. Everything in this document is written against these politicians. And if we have not read the Constitution, and we think that it contains in it what these politicians tell us it contains, they lying here too, talking about there's a Bill of Rights in the Constitution. You know, I go on, as I was saying this about global warming. I go on these radio shows, I be talking to these knuckleheads. They've been to these public schools, been brainwashed by this government-centered education system, where everybody comes out to go in there very inquisitive. The first graders, they're very excited, they're animated. They just can't hardly wait to learn how to read. And by fourth grade, they've taken all that energy out of them and killed it. And so now we got dropouts in the fourth grade. And you say, well, they can't drop out until they're 16 years old. No, they dropped out in fourth grade. They just left the building at 16. Everton was not the only one that left the building. The children leave the building out at 16 because there won't be any Attila enforcement of their leaving. So they're kept in there because Attila will come after them otherwise. So they stay in the building until they're 16, but they dropped out at grade 4 because they had rejected that madness that's inside those classrooms. And they won't even let the teachers teach anymore. They give them these tests. They got to go in there and beat into the children's heads so that they can pass a government test, which the test ensures they never will learn anything because the test doesn't test anything that the children need to know. It tests the thing the government wants them to know. And so there's no education going on because the government even took over, not only did they take over the school system. Go read Napolitano's book called Theodore and Woodrow, a very good book about how the left got started, how we got this education system that we have right now through these two progressive, Theodore Roosevelt.
Oh, by the way, I didn't know if you found out or heard, but John Taylor Gatto, the public school teacher who turned against the public school system several years ago, wrote several books about the dumbing down of America through the American education system. He passed away the other day.
Okay, I didn't know he passed.
I don't know if you know who he was.
Yeah, the dumbing of America.
Right.
John, also Bloom, Alan Bloom's work along the same line. James Herndon, a lot of people have written against it. What was that one person's name? Went into the public school system trying to reform it, and he got burned out. I mean, they say you can't fight City Hall. Of course, City Hall is the one that's saying that, but this is a monstrosity that's in place here, and we all captured by it. And part of the power that it wields, although there's force in back of it, part of its power is the power of delusion, and its complete investment in propaganda. Everything that we have coming from these weasels, these parasites, and that's what they are.
Did you ever hear about the quote from Benjamin Rush, though, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, about the purpose of education? And basically, it boils down, he didn't use the term, but to indoctrinate, to imbue the child, the student, with the sense that he or she, when is called upon, has to abandon their family even and go against them to serve the ends of the government. So this is a signer of the Declaration of Independence. So this has been afoot for generations, and it's more radicalized and more pushed in the 60s through now, but it was always there.
Go and look at those tests that they had prior to the 20th century. Go look at those tests when they had schools that were not these government-run incarceration camps, these feeding systems into the prison system, which is what these schools are. These are holding tanks until they get old enough to incarcerate. Talking about educate, these are indoctrination centers, and they are holding tanks for the later incarceration that goes on if you're not learning those schools what they want you to learn. What they want you to learn first and foremost is close your mouth, shut up, and behave.
Well, another thing is too, I'd like to be
that's what they teach you.
A lot of listeners might not know your background. You were a public school teacher for 39 years. 39
years, and 36 of those years in the classroom, and 39 of them they were trying to fire me, and they did not succeed. I'm the most shocked person about that, but I'm still here, and that's why I have to tell you something, that I know I create a lot of hot it's very hot out there where I go, and I go in public and everybody want to come over there and jump in my lane and get in my face. Look here, I don't care what you say. And you might as well cut that out because it didn't have any effect upon me. I know you're not going to do any more than I'm going to do, because I want to tell you what Malcolm said. Malcolm X. Some of my students think that they said, Ms. Moss, you talk about Malcolm X in school. Yeah, I know him better. And they think they know him better than I know him, because they think that my conservative perch is somehow surrendering some of the ideas I taught when I was in the classroom. They're just as silly as some of the other, not all students that I taught are on the one. Some are just as silly as some of these others out there.
If Malcolm X came about now, his most vehement foe would be those people who are professed to be on the left.
Oh, all of them. Yeah. All of them. And I think they ought to go read his speech. Let me give you the date of the speech so you understand who's dealing here. The speech was given November the 10th, 1963, which is his last speech that he gave as a member of the Nation of Islam, because after that he's going to be silenced, and then 3 months after that he's going to abandon the NOI, the group that Farrakhan now leads, and set up his own organization. But Malcolm in his speech called Ballot, not the Ballads of Bullets, that was a later speech, that was the one in 64. The one in 63 was called Message to the Grassroots, and Malcolm X was talking in that speech about these blacks who are Democrats. And I'll give you a quote from that speech, because Malcolm was talking about the black vote having been pivotal in the election of 1960, in which he put in there John F. Kennedy, who was another president, was forced into glory, just like Abraham Lincoln was forced into glory. Neither one of them had any intent of doing anything on behalf of blacks, but blacks, have not realized that. These persons were being pushed by these circumstances, and by black people deciding that the time had come when they're going to make their own mark. And that is true of Lincoln. Read Bennett's book called Force and Glory. And that's also true of Kennedy. Go read the book, the second volume of Taylor Branch's book. The first volume of the trilogy was called Pardon the Waters. The second is called Pillar of Fire. Go read that book, which is written from first book Branch put out is from 1954 to 1963. Pillar of Fire, the second volume, is written from 1963 to 1965, and the third volume was written from 65 to 68, the death of Dr. King being the last year in which his writings. His writings on the civil rights movement. But in the midst of that movement, in case you haven't heard, is Malcolm's voice. And in 1963, Malcolm X gave an analysis of the March on Washington that occurred on August the 28th of that year. So September, October, November. 3 months later, Malcolm X gives an analysis of that march. And he says that during the election of 1960, he said blacks threw 80% of their vote behind the Democratic Party. He said, you put them first and they put you last because you're a chump. He said that it's only because of the black vote that the Democrats were in power. He said, in all the legislation, they brought it up and got it out of the way, and then he said, and now they bring up you because you're a chump. And then he was coming to a point in his speech where he said, anytime you throw your weight behind the Democratic Party and that party can't keep the promise that they made to you during the election time and you dumb enough to continue to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, you're a traitor to your race. And Malcolm X said that in 1963, John, if he came back today, he would be pointing a finger at every one of these dumb, persons that are still voting 90% for a party that takes their vote and then slaps them for 4 more years until they run again another 4 years later, or another 2 years later, and they're out there voting again for the same clowns over and over again. At least get some new clowns in there.
I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to ask you to do something that the liberals...
I know you don't like this, right?
No, I'm going to ask you this. I'm going to ask you this. I'm going to ask you to do something that the liberals engage in, like Hillary Clinton channeled, Eleanor Roosevelt. How do you think? What do you think Malcolm X would say according to Kanye West? Right now about this, because he's leading this thing called Believe in It, Blexit or whatever, to lead the Democratic Party. He's making a fashion apparel based upon that too. Do you think there'd be some kind of common accord? Do you think he'd be bewildered or what?
He'd be on the same side as Kanye West. He was said with more. He would be more articulate than Kanye West, but you can't go with how articulate someone is, because Malcolm's teacher Elijah Muhammad was inarticulate. You have to get to the message, and Kanye West's message is right on point, and so is Candace Jones. Her points are well taken. Malcolm was a very articulate, very polished speaker. You can listen to some of his great speeches. Message to Grassroots is probably considered his best speech, but he gave 2 speeches called Battles of Bullets. Gave one in Cleveland, and gave one, I think it must have been June the 12th of 1964 in Detroit. The one in Detroit is a classic. I think the one in Philadelphia was kind of like, it's a good speech. It wasn't as well polished, but it was much more polished when he gave it in Detroit. And you can listen to that speech to get some idea of how polished this man was. But he would not be in disagreement with Kanye West. I tell you who would be in disagreement with. He'd be in disagreement with these charlatans like Al Sharpton. And John, did you see Al Sharpton? They showed it again as they're showing the anti-Semitism of Farrakhan. They were showing how they had Alan Dershowitz, the professor emeritus from Harvard University. They had him on. They were showing a film clip of Farrakhan. There was Farrakhan, then there was Al Sharpton, then there was Jesse Jackson, and then there was Bill Clinton. And they were showing it because, given this talk about people being anti-Semitic, they were showing how the Democratic Party has embraced, Farrakhan. And I want to make this statement here so that people will understand that I'm aware of the term anti-Semitic, meaning there are 2 Semitic groups, the Arabs and the Jews. So I understand the division of this Semitic group through Abraham in terms of the claims made in the Quran and in the Bible. One through Abraham lineage to Sarah, and also the lineage to Hagar. So I'm aware of that. So there are 2 branches of it. So to say that he's anti-Semitic would be a generic type of way of saying it. But more specifically, since there are 2 Semitic groups, it'd be much more specific to say he's anti-Jewish. he is anti-Israeli. He's anti anything that goes on in the Middle East because he's pro-Arab. I mean, that's who pays him, on the side. Farrakhan Farrakhan is captured by the Arab group. Those are his paymasters. And those of you that are Muslims, I know you don't like me saying that, but I said it, and I said it because it's true, and you can't say anything about that other than the fact that it's true. He's being financed by the Arab world. Now, I've been in that world, so I can come back and tell you that that's true. And I'll tell you this also. Farrakhan built a mosque in Gambia with the money that was some of the money that was in fact raised in the Million Man March. Did that in '95. I went to Gambia and saw it with my own eyes and heard the guys tell me out of their own mouths who built that mosque. It's now in disrepair, but that mosque was built after the Million Man March. And so when you're asking where did the money go, they got that commercial, Pepsodent commercial. You wonder where the yellow went. You wonder where the yellow went when you use Pepsodent. You wonder where the money went. Well, some of it went there, and I went there. I wasn't there to verify that, but while I was there, that's what I found out. And where I go, I find out some things about this leadership. You'd be surprised of how much information about these people on the outside of the country. Particularly, well, don't get me started on that. But I'm telling you that all these persons, politicians, the political leadership, all of these persons, it's a scam that's going on. Okay, so Malcolm was talking about the politicians waking back in that time period. If he came back here today, if Malcolm X came back here in 2018, he would be just as condemnatory of these leaders today as he was in that time period. He called them out at that time. Many of them he called, before he left the Nation of Islam, was calling them Uncle Toms and everything under the book. And when he came out of the nation, he said that I hope they can forgive me for all the mean things I said about them, and they can forgive me and I can overlook the things they said about me. But he was trying to turn the corner. But he was very critical of leadership. He didn't understand what King was trying to do. King out there leading people away from their own institutions. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that they were doing. And Malcolm would be critical of that. Now, would he side with Jesse Jackson? Would he side with this? You're talking about a parasite. Al Sharpton. Al Sharpton is one of the biggest parasitic influences in the black community. But it ain't just Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson. What about those hobos? You probably can't put this on television. These hobos in the Congressional Black Caucus. They ought to change the name. At least be as honest as the NAACP. The NAACP is called the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. They don't put black in their name. They still colored from 1909 to 2018. They haven't stopped being colored yet. I know you didn't like that either. People just do not get me. I don't care about what these brainwashed liberals have to say. See, I dismiss your voice. Look, I don't have anything to say to you, and you don't have anything to say to me. And that makes that, we cut that right down the middle. I don't even want to talk to any liberals because you're the problem in the black community.
Well, it's like you face the dilemma the libertarians always have faced. One day you'll get called a radical leftist by a right winger, and you'll be called you'll be called a right wing nut job by a left winger. I mean, because you have to come around on different sides of the issue. You can't be carte blanche across the board because I am all over the place.
I'm straight. I tell you what I am. I'm straightforward. You don't have to, that song called Send a Telegram, oh, send it. You don't have to send me a telegram to find out where I am. I am straightforward. What you see is what you get. You won't get anything other than what you see. There's not a George Moss in front of the camera and a George Moss in private. That George Moss doesn't exist. And what you see is what you get. And if you don't like what you get, you know what that is? That's tough.
You actually tied in with Julian Bonds several years ago. Julian Bonds, wasn't it, down there?
I hooked up with Julian Bond in terms of a confrontation with Julian Bond.
That's what I mean. You faced off with him at one time.
Down there at the University of Michigan. Me and my entourage, were about 4 of us down there. We were the only ones that when they introduced this hustler, that we were the only ones not standing. And I wasn't going to stand up until I had a question to ask. He's speaking in front of about 500 people, and they're applauding his nonsense. Julian Bond, by the way, back in the day had some, he was in the SNCC organization, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and he did have some worth at that time. But then, these guys come out of these organizations, they pay their dues, they're going to go in here now and get paid. And Julian Bond became the very parasite that Booker T. Washington was talking about in 1911, when Washington said that there's a segment of, he called them Negroes, that's what most of them still are. He says a segment of Negroes who have found out that they can make a living by holding up the Negro grievance. He said they do not want the Negro to leave or to lose his grievance because they don't want to lose their jobs. And that's true of these Negroes in the Congressional Black Caucus right now, and we should demand they change that name and put colored folks up there. The Congressional Colored Folks Caucus, or what Rush Limbaugh would call them, the Black Caucasian Caucus. Well, that's not what they are, John. And let me just end by doing something to show that. They talk about birthright citizenship. John, how much time do we have?
About 4 minutes.
About 4 minutes is all I need. They talk about birthright citizenship. And they say Donald Trump is trying to, promise that he's going to pass an executive order to end birthright citizenship. In other words, you come in here, drop a child in the country, your child automatically becomes a citizen. And they're saying that's based upon the 14th Amendment. I even heard some of these clowns like Paul Ryan, who is a parasitic clown, saying that the president cannot amend the Constitution. That cannot go on and blah, blah, blah. So Paul Ryan, I have the Constitution in my hand. And you're supposed to talking about the 14th Amendment. And because you are a parasitic politician, you're a parasite, and that means that you are probably one of the persons in the elite that don't know anything, because that's most of you in Washington, because being led by people who are psychopaths, and they don't know anything. That's why Donald Trump is getting something done, and you all have not been able to do anything over the course of the last, how many decades has it been? This man has gotten done more things in less than 2 years than the Congress has done in 2 decades. How did that happen? Because they're parasites. They don't know anything. And this thing about birthright citizenship is another misinterpretation of the Constitution by these parasites. There's nothing in here that declares legal to birthright citizenship. The language is very specific. But these, can I use the word dummies? These parasites can't even read. The 14th Amendment is what they're quoting. This is one of the 3 civil rights bills that were passed in the aftermath of the Civil War, so-called Civil War, because we've not had a Civil War. We had 2 wars of secession. One succeeded and one didn't. The 14th Amendment says, and I'm going to tell you why it says what it says in just a minute. All persons born or naturalized in the United States, and this is a conjunctive part of it because the word and connects up the first part to the second part, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Now, that's one sentence. It's a compound sentence. You can have compound sentence with a semicolon, or you can have a compound sentence with the word and. It's a compound sentence, so that makes it very complex for people like Paul Ryan, who can't read, who is obviously illiterate. The reason why it makes a conjunctive sentence is because it wanted to include and at the same time exclude. Include in terms of making the slave citizens who are all persons born and naturalized in the United States. So the former slaves who were born or naturalized in the United States, but excludes the others who are born or naturalized in the United States if they're not subject to the laws of the United States. You see, that includes the former slaves, because they're born in the United States, or they were naturalized in the United States, but they are subject to the laws, so it includes them. But the others that are born here that are not citizens or naturalized in the country, then it excludes them because they are not subject to the laws of the United States. Partially. They are while they're here, but the jurisdiction is elsewhere. And that's why they added that part of that sentence and made it a conjunctive sentence rather than saying all persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens of the United States. No, they didn't do that. They said all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. And these clowns are trying to act like you drop a child in here, you're a citizen. Boy, are you stupid. Okay, I got to get off these politicians now. Our time has run out. More next week on these clowns. Until next week, I want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.